Good morning. It's good to be here today. My name is Pastor Nathan. I am an associate pastor with Ann Arbor CRC, primarily serving in spiritual formation and justice ministry through Cohort Detroit in the city of Detroit, and always good to be here with the gift of opening up the Word together today from James 3, a word which I think some captions say taming the tongue. And I think every commentary, every person I read noted the irony on the very front end of a passage about maybe speaking less and listening more of a 20-minute sermon, maybe not being the best format, but we're doing it. So James 3, we'll step into it, hopefully listening and learning together, even with a few moments of pausing to listen throughout the message to what the Spirit might be saying. So James 3, verses 1 through 12. James says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships, though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them. Yet they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature, can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh." As the kids and Pastor Kristen taught us, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. James is very clear. Words carry fire. Words carry fire. It's very clear as we read this and listen to it that words carry fire in two ways. This is how we'll step into this passage today. Words carry fire because they hurt, and words carry fire because they heal. Words carry fire. Words carry fire because they hurt, and words carry fire because they heal. I have to step back just a moment and maybe think about what it means for us that words carry fire. So I'd invite you just to kind of check in with your shoulders or your neck or your spine, maybe your legs, maybe your feet on the floor. Are you feeling a little bit of tension or stress or anxiety? You can even roll your head forward like this, just get a sense. Feel free to move. shift your shoulders and see. Are you carrying any stress or tension or anxiety? I'm training for our Cohort Detroit Relay Marathon, which we do every year. It's a beautiful time down in Detroit. And I might be sore because of that, but I also think my neck has just been sore and my spine for I think several months now, just more than it used to be. And I think James diagnoses this stress in a way that's actually really refreshing. He says in verse 5 that we're living in the middle of a forest fire of words. Words that are coming at us, bombarding us, words that are probably very directly linked to the pain that we feel in our shoulders or our back or our neck. James is naming these words have great power, the power of a fire. He says, how great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. I think we might be feeling that. He takes boasting as a first example. At the end of verse 5, he says, the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. If you just think about your last week and think about what we've heard as we head into a political election season, as we just think about our workplaces, as we think about our own lives and everything that's coming at us through Instagram reels and stories and words and news cycles, and then our temptation to respond with louder boasts and louder boasts, that all carries a lot of stress. And we're probably carrying that in our necks and our bodies. And just simply hearing James name that, the power of those words, is important. And to know that it's not just us in this present moment, in this season. There's a commentary that I think all of us pastors have been using for this series, this journey through James, by Dr. Martha Moore Keish. And she quotes a 19th century Methodist reverend named Charles Deems, who is speaking about this phenomenon of words coming at us faster than we can handle. And I want to read his quote. I think he coined a word for it, this barrage of words, which is much teachingness, which I think might need a rebrand. He says much teachingness, but then he goes on to say, a disposition to be always taking the chair, much given to finding fault, correcting, playing the censor, putting on professional airs, having an opinion on every subject, with great readiness to give it dogmatically, dictatorially, pontifically, as being paramount, final, infallible, from which there is no appeal. I like that because I think that is what we're feeling, isn't it? That's kind of the air that we're breathing. It's everywhere, all at once, coming at us. All of those words. And James uses an escalation of images to try to get at the same idea, to name this for the churches that are dispersed throughout. He first uses this image of a horse. In verse 3, he says, if we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. And I don't know who are horse people here, or if anybody enjoys show jumping. I was looking to see if Pastor Bailey was here today. But I think the weight of a show jumping horse, like the one that we saw at the Olympics, is probably about 1,400 pounds. You can correct me if you want. But James is saying that's 1,400 pounds of words that are often unwise, spoken too quickly, coming at us. And then he goes on to give an analogy of a boat, of a barge. So in verse 4, James says, or look at ships. They are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them. Yet they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. When I think about big ships, I think of the catastrophe that happened in Baltimore with I think it was the Sir Francis Scott Key Bridge, when a ship that lost its propulsion steering, the hydraulic fluid no longer worked, and it couldn't turn the rudder. The weight of that ship, I think, is 116,000 metric tons. And doing some math, that's actually the weight of about 2,131 houses. 2,131 houses as a rough estimate that's being steered by that little rudder. So no wonder we're feeling stressed as we think about words. The tongue boasts of great exploits. Doesn't it feel a bit like we've got the weight of 2,131 barges coming at us? So I so deeply appreciate how James begins. First, by just saying, not many of you should become teachers. That's honest, and we should probably read that up front every single morning for anybody who's teaching, not just up front, but in any capacity, those who are teaching or sharing. Then he says, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. Then he says, for all of us make many mistakes. That humility, combined with the boasting that we hear around us, speaks volumes. It speaks toward, I think, what was at the end of the passage in chapter 2 that Pastor Noah preached on, where it says that mercy triumphs over judgment. It's that same sentiment that we make mistakes. But man, these words carry fire. These words carry fire because these words hurt. These words hurt. And as I was working through this passage, in some ways the next logical step would be to turn the finger on me and turn the finger on you and to tell you all to just stop it. Just stop saying dumb things. Just don't do it anymore. Just be done. But I don't actually think we need to be told that our words carry fiery hurt. I think in our own lives, we have a littering of collapsed bridges. It feels at times that our denomination is one of them. Maybe some of you feel like even your households or your homes or your extended family is one of them. And personally, we know how hard it is and how badly we regret the words that we have spoken that we wish we could take back. I think we know the fiery power of words, and a just stop it is perhaps not what we need first. So instead of focusing on how our words have hurt others as we walk through this chapter in James, first, I wonder if we can actually sit back and ask ourselves, what are the words this week, 2 years ago, much longer ago, that have hurt you? What are the words that have hurt so deeply they set the course of your life on fire? The words last week that you'll be sitting with for a decade. The words a decade ago that you are still sitting with now. The words 50 years ago that you heard that you still cannot erase. Who spoke them? And what did they say? We'll just take 20 seconds of silence to sit with that question together. Who spoke those words, and what did they say? Feel free to put your head down for 10 seconds as you think. Who spoke those words, And what did they say? In our Cohort Detroit ministry, we used to start every year of our 10-month ministry fellowship by diving into Detroit's history of justice and racial injustice. But we realized we actually need to begin with God's love. And we realized we needed to begin with God's love because there was this massive barrier of shame because of the words that had been spoken to our cohort participants in their past. And so we actually had to start with shame, which is rooted directly in why James talks about these words having so much fire. And so there's I think, 75-year-old therapist, Jane Middleton Moss, a wise presence, who defines shame as the experience of judging who we are against the image that significant adults in our childhood gave us through their actions, their words, or their gestures. When we feel shame, we see ourselves as having failed to live up to that fantasy image created of us. Shame is the experience of judging who we are against the image that significant adults in our childhood gave us through their actions. So you think about that, and you think about your own words that are coming to mind. I think it's healthy to realize that James is spending this chapter naming the weight of those words. I think sometimes we think we can just move past them, and to be reminded that these words carry fire is deeply important, and James takes them seriously because God takes them seriously. And I wanted to share a very short story. Not even a story, just one line that a friend of mine who's queer heard from a parent. And she gave me permission to share this. And I want to share it because I think it not just speaks to those of us who we hurt with our casual words, but I hope we can all relate to it in terms of words that are equally painful that have been spoken. But this person on a phone call with me, she had not come out to her parents as queer, as gay, and she was in a conversation, I think, about gay marriage with her dad. And her dad just made this offhand comment. He said, "I'm not even annoyed or afraid by people who are gay. I'm just disgusted." Just disgusted. I want to share that in part because those of us who are here, who are LGBTQ, are likely not shocked by that. They've been hearing these things all the time from many of us. And yet it speaks to the fiery power that words have, because that will sit in her head for a long, long time. James goes on to say, the tongue stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. So I think about those among us who have received words that have instilled in them this literal fear of hell. Because when I talk to a lot of people around me, whether they're LGBTQ or other folks who have been hurt in certain ways, there's this visceral and tangible fear of hell that is escalated way beyond what I have felt. And I think James gets at this. This is what he's saying. The words have the literal power of hellfire. And so for those of you here who have received those words, know that those words are not from God. That's not God's voice. That is not the God who made us. Those are our voices that have spoken to you. James is right. Those are fiery, fiery verses. And I know that the father of this woman who spoke those words, he had also received words of fire that were deeply painful and cutting, and that he was simply putting his own shame on his daughter. And so I share this story not just because this is a group of our friends who we need to care about deeply, but also because we can learn something about God's love and about the ways in which we have been deeply hurt. So I'd like you to turn back to your own hurts and realize that just as you received that word of disgust as a weight that's going to sit with you for a while. And it helps us to turn toward beginning to heal. So James 3, verses 7 through 8. It says, "For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed, and has been tamed by the human species. But no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison." That makes a lot more sense when we think about our stories of hurt. And again, this could be a text that we turn the finger pointing toward you or toward me. But James is speaking to a group of Jewish Christians who know the Psalms very well and very deeply. And this is likely pulling from Psalm 140, which is a psalm of lament, which is a perfect way to respond to those hard words that we've heard, which says, "Deliver me, O Lord, from evildoers." It equates the tongue with evil, as James does over and over. "Protect me from those who are violent, who plan evil things in their minds, and stir up wars continually. They make their tongue sharp as a snake's, and under their lips is a venom of vipers." I think what James is doing is not just saying, be careful about how you speak, but also naming the pain of the words that people have received. Those fiery words that have been spoken to you, we name them as wrong, as evil, like James does. They were not from God. And if you spoke some of those words, James also connects to Psalm 32, which is a psalm of confession, which says, "I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin." These are words that begin to heal when we name them and acknowledge the hurt that we've received. And then James offers perhaps the most healing words. He reminds us that we and everyone we speak to is made in the image of God. This is chapter 3, verse 9. It's almost casual. He says, "With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God." James is the only author, actually, in the New Testament that picks up the Hebrew and Jewish teaching rooted in God's image. All the other times when the image of God is used in the New Testament, it's in reference to Jesus, which is appropriate. But James picks it up and gives it in direct reference to us, God's creation, connecting our words that are spoken to us through the lens of God's image, so that when we receive those words, we know that those words were not just spoken and born and endured by us, but they were actually spoken to the very heart of God. That is deeply powerful. This image that we are created in. And so our cohort also, this past weekend with our first learning retreat, we asked this question, which I appreciate asking myself every year when we return to it. In what way do you represent this likeness of God, this image of God? Maybe not a question we ask so often. In what way do you represent the image of God? So what is a word or two that God would use to describe you while smiling and laughing with you? And if that feels a little bit challenging, we'll take 20 seconds, again, to just think of words that have set your world on fire, but in a good way, in a life-changing way. The words that have sustained you. So take 20 seconds and think about who spoke those words and what did they say? Who spoke those life-giving words and what did they say? We'll take 20 seconds. Consider. Those words might come to you later this week. Your mind might be blank. It's probably too little time. But keep thinking about that question. And for those of you who have kind of surfaced those words, what does it feel like to receive those from God? What does it feel like to receive those from a God that is smiling and laughing with you? Isn't that powerful? A sense of joy? A sense of relief? I hope that's at least what you're experiencing. That's the fig tree that James mentions at the end. That's the fresh streams of water. That's God looking at you and saying those words that have been spoken to you, and maybe even those words that you've spoken to others. Those are not my words. Those are not my words. So James reminds me, James reminds you, James reminds us that we've been made in the likeness, in the very image, in the very stuff of God. So you, who are still exhausting yourself because you were told you'd never get good grades, and you who are still hurting because of what that friend said to you, you were made in the likeness of God. And for you regretting that moment from 45 years ago, you were made in the likeness of God. And you only hearing criticism at work, you were made in the likeness of God. And you having your identity questioned or being talked down to because you are aging, you are made in the image of God. Those are words of fire. These words can heal. So share them. Let them in. Don't block them out as if they weren't true. Hear the words from James of life, of healing, springs of water, figs on a tree, that God is speaking to you and me, to us, and the words that we will speak to each other today. Amen. I'll invite the worship team forward because one of the best ways we can hear these words of healing fire is through the table of communion. And during our time in James today, we'll be hearing these words first through worship.